Do you know, I said to Michelle today, I really didn't want to come to work today. I just thought it's going to be asshole, and that it is. Right.
Stirrups.
So, bingo! The stirrups!
Is that from riding an elephant?
Ow. Right, these are very small horses before we even start, right? So the width of this burial.
What, like a
is,
pony, you mean?
yeah, okay, you're making up for it, all of you today, because
Donkey.
It's the word for yes.
right, okay, so this is 1.75 metres in width, right? So it gives you an idea that this is a very small area to have two horses. Now, those are rightly referred to as what? Stirrups, and not flippers. Everyone has made the same mistake this week. They are not flippers. Now, the lady in question, referring to this burial, was thought to be a man when they originally excavated this site. The body itself was found in 1889, and it was found in Sweden. She's known as Berka, the Viking warrior. Now, the wonderful thing when we look at this site, this individual, it goes into all the changes that we've seen in archaeology. Original people working in archaeology, 99% of all those involved in archaeology, all the work, all the scientific stuff, from the late 1800s going into the early 1900s, it was primarily done by men. Now, most people involved in archaeology are actually female. And what that does, it offers new interpretations into lots of the archaeology that had been done before. Whereas Sir Mortimer Wheeler, working at Maiden Castle in the early 1930s, would have referred to there being a cemetery relating to the Roman invasion in AD 43, being a complete wrong interpretation, where a woman would come along and actually say, well, if people are buried with their pots and pans and everything, they're obviously not part of a military burial site. Things are usually missed when you've got an archaeological bias, and very much so when you're working on archaeology within various sites where there's constraints on time. The usual preconceptions are made. So the preconception is, if you found something like this today, the archaeologists having very little time to interpret what they're saying, what they're seeing, what they're saying, good, is that naturally two horses, shield, spear, axe, proper sword, another spear, bow and arrow, definitely got to belong to a man. Right, let's next go on to the next burial. Right, there are 3,000 burials being found within the Birka landscape, B-I-R-K-A, within the Birka landscape in Sweden, eastern Sweden. You can imagine 3,000 burials being found today, right? We know what that is. It's definitely males buried in there. Let's go on to the next one, so on and so on. Jewellery found in the next one, got to be a woman, right? So these are the parameters that archaeologists sometimes work with these days. Where you've got the luxury of working on a set of human remains that I've done so in the past, I might be doing also at this minute, you're able to completely interpret everything you're seeing properly without the haste and rush that's placed on you by modern day archaeology. And in a way, when this was being found in 1889, the interpretation was that this was a man. Thought to be a male warrior since the Graves excavation in 1889 until 2017, the remains have been proven to be that of a female. The study concludes the artefacts buried with the woman are evidence she was a high-ranking professional warrior. Archaeologists have ever since worried and debated and sort of reanalysed this, saying actually she may have been found with all these artefacts, but they definitely belong to a brother or a dad. You can't win, really. The problem is inherent in archaeology is stereotypes. And when we look at the stereotypes, we think, right, man goes to battle, woman sits around the house on her arse producing children. Those are the stereotypes, right? When in fact, women have been seen to fight battles. For example, when I was a reenactment soldier, and I used to have my own brown bess rifle, used to fire live rounds and all the rest of it. We started going into the annals. It was a very masculine group we were in, and in the beginning of the 90s, and we started looking at the records, and we thought, right, male, female. Oh my God, there's a female in this army in 1776. Male, female, there's another female. So when we had people approaching the organisation saying, actually, I want to dress up as a soldier, we said, yeah, you can dress up as a soldier, because back in that day, the company that we're reenacting from 1775, 1776, 1777 and so on, actually had women in it. But you don't find that in history. There were women at Culloden. There were women involved in the Boudiccan uprising, and then you start to see that history is actually full of women. Catherine the Great, she was definitely a man. No, she wasn't. She was a woman. Elizabeth I. So there are all these figures in history that are women, right? And the conclusion has to be that it's very premature to look at what's found with the individual and just immediately presume that they're the sex relating to those objects. For example, lots of figures in history have been found with nice gold brooches and sort of nice bits of jewellery, definitely women. No, they're actually men. So you've got to be very careful when you're looking at the archaeology. So the best way to do this, as we approached it on Thursday, as we approached it on Tuesday and Monday, is to sort of look at what we've got and then go to the text, look at what we've got, and we'll go on like that. So initially what you're looking at within the burial itself is that when it was excavated in 1889, they did a very good job of it. Unlike the excavations at Pavlan Cave in 1822, 1823, where things were missed, including whole mammoth skulls on desks and offices in Oxford. But most of the stuff was actually preserved and kept from this original excavation in 1889, down to one or two items of clothing where the materials actually survived as well. So what we've really got here are these two wonderful horses, ponies, but depending which way you look at it. Oh God, what's happened there? Lynn, sorry Lynn, I didn't mean. Right. See, did you mention I mentioned Lynn and it came straight back? You see, what she's done, she's got a cauldron back at home and she's chucking toads and frogs in there. That was a toad she just chucked in there then. She knows I like toads. Right, so we've got these two horses here. And when you look at the stirrups and you look at this item here, this dirk here with a nice scabbard would have been used by somebody actually on a horse, because there's three hanging loops on it. Stirrups, a person from over 1,000 years ago, stirrups were in some cases quite an innovation. So there you go. These may have not been the horses that she was actually riding, because if you can get proportions of the body, sort of from butt to nose, maybe no more than 2 meters. So this is quite a small animal because it's slightly bent inwards, turned inwards. So these are quite small animals. But we'll actually go back to these horses in a short while. You've got a bowl, you've got a nice belt with a gold adornments on it as well. You've got these two spears. And the way she's dressed is with this nice little bit of headgear. And when they excavated the back of her skull, they found something very intriguing indeed. Silver orb-like objects. But we'll look at that in a short while. So moving on from this illustration, what I'd like to do is actually move on to this one. And actually, as Ellen's here, we need to show you exactly where this site is, don't we? Sorry, Ellen. Let's just go quickly to that one, because you get very upset if we don't show you where this is. So if we go there, there is Sweden, Finland, Norway, Burka, slightly inland alongside a big lake. There it is. Got that out my chest. So if we move back, and we move back to this illustration. This is a coloured-in illustration from back in 1889. And what's good about this illustration from 1889, it actually sort of shows the body as it was when it was excavated. And you can see these interesting things at the back of the skull, just. And that there, the shaft for the axe is gone, but a fairly good reconstruction. And if you look at the top of the horse's skull, you can see something that is missing. And what is clearly missing, oh hang on, sorry Lynn, what is clearly missing, if we bring this down, it hasn't been poleaxed. So, you know, there's no sign of any, what's wrong, Alan?
Was it buried alive?
No, I'm going to come on to this now. It wasn't poleaxed. However, animals get very panicky. And if they tried to attempt to bury this alive, both of these animals would have tried to get out. It would have been a hell of a mess. It's likely they were poisoned rather than buried alive. So, you know, there's lots of concoctions. You know, when you're out in the fields, there's lots of things that animals shouldn't eat. They weren't placed into the pits dead. Now that's clear. I've got two little pet goats, right, and I do lift them up and give them cuddles. But I can imagine those are little pet goats, okay? Having two large beasts like this, they're dying, and then you try and move them into the pit, right? It just wouldn't be possible. So they would have been placed into the pit, already poisoned, and as they're just moving around, not writhing around much, not making much damage to the surround. These two horses would have pushed this thin stone slab over, and it would have destroyed whatever's alongside it, right? So these, when you say were they buried alive, the answer is when the soul's been placed onto them, they're already dead. Right, that's clear, and there's no sign that they've actually been poleaxed either. So that's another thing. All these nice little clues. Lots have actually been made on the body, but not much fuss has been made on these poor animals. And that's all. When you're doing something like this in front of a group, the information undoubtedly always focuses on the human remains and what's with the human remains and this individual. Those two beasts don't exist. But we've got to look at those two beasts because they're an important parameter to understanding who this individual is. 1 second, Jim. The other point to be made, and I know I make this every week, there's 3,000 burials being found within this landscape, all Viking burials, right? This one has been excavated, and most of the others have been excavated as well, properly. There are other female burials. And the point has to be made, when you're looking at the information for this, it says that, you know, she's buried with all these and buried with horses. She must have been a senior member of society. But there are lots of other people buried with these types of things. And if everyone's senior members of society, then do you see what I mean? In archaeology, when for example, there's lots of chariot burials in Yorkshire, a site called Wet Wang Slack, right? There's, I think, 20 odd chariot burials that they've actually found, right? And if you're saying that each one of these is actually kings, right? They had a lot of bloody kings in that society in the Iron Age, and they had lots of kings in this period. If that's the case, where's all the people to support them? Where are they getting all the taxes from to be kings in the first place? So you've got to look at this more as a logical progression, right? There's different levels of importance in society, and there was different levels of importance in society back then. A potter was important. A potter could be as important as the head of the village because the potter provided the pots. A pharmacist could save all our lives in this room. The Queen couldn't support. The Queen couldn't save all our lives because she hasn't got medical knowledge. So the pharmacist is more important than the Queen. Should I be shot down by a bot? I do respect the Queen greatly, but the point I'm trying to make is that there are different levels of importance in society, right?
Low skill.
Pardon?
Low skills people.
Low skill, lots of low skilled people
Yeah.
are important because they keep society going. So you use the word low skill, but that's the term you're using now. Then,
Priti Patel is using that.
oh right, okay. Let's not get political now. Let's not get political. There are these things that keep society going, and that's the point. They are important. So anyway, what I'd like to do is a few more facts. And a few more facts are as so. If we keep that in the background, and let's keep away from politics. Did anyone read my wonderful letter in the Gem today?
Yeah.
Last week.
Oh no, this week.
Oh, not this.
Haven't got it yet.
You haven't got it yet. Oh, you'll it's the one that I'm saying that the present MP is wonderful. Just to wind people up.
You were nice last week as well.
Right, initial excavations. It could be in the Barry edition. You're not supposed to look at the Barry Gem while we're doing this. Initial excavations at this site. Archaeologist and ethnographer Heldmar Stulp excavated a burial chamber. And this burial chamber, known as BJ 581. In 1889, he documented the grave. It has been considered, back then, and maybe more so now, as one of the most iconic graves from the Viking Age. It's probably a very iconic grave from the Viking Age because it has it all. And that's what was being said back then. The grave was marked by a large boulder initially. And this grave itself with a large boulder, just under 3.5 metres long, and we've got what the width being 1.75 metres wide to carry those horses, was in a very important position within the landscape. But then again, it's the landscape that we see today. When archaeologists say, oh, this is really important, it's because in archaeology, all we've got left is what we see. We don't necessarily understand the full landscape as it was. For example, you look at the Battle of Culloden. If you go to the site of Culloden today, it's completely different than when it was back then, right? And we go back then, it's really boggy landscape. I don't know how they managed to wander across this landscape. It was very different today. And back then as well, back with this body, buried over 1,000 years ago, the landscape was very different. So the interpretation of the boulder and where she's sat within the landscape is a different interpretation. The body was found in a sitting position, or more or less crouched position more than anything. And this individual, if you try and get into another point I'm trying to make here. If you see this body and they found evidence of silk and they found evidence of silver thread decorations. Now if they had been found first, I wonder if the archaeologist would have thought, right, this is definitely a woman. And then he finds a sword and he says, oh, forget about all that evidence, it's definitely a man. But then again, I could equally argue that men wore silk back in the past as well. So again, that point of looking at artefacts in the ground, saying what they are definitely relates to that sex of the individual is wrong. And he starts to describe a sword, an axe, a spear, armour-piercing arrows, a battle knife, 2 shields, 2 horses, 1 mare and 1 stallion, and something else, which is by there, right? And those things are actually intriguing, and it's very faint, and the illustration is very faint initially anyway. But these are actually playing pieces. She had a board game buried with her. Should we just say they had a board game buried with her? That's more interesting. They had a board game buried with them. And it was only seen that only men should have a board game buried with them as well. Right, so it's definitely male. 128 years ago plus. a battle-hardened man. And the warrior has been compared to those greatest warriors of the ancient Viking world. But now, since 2017, she's a shield maiden. She's a Valkyrie. A woman who was meant to protect the men. A woman who led men in battle, but not back in 1889. So if we look at a few more illustrations, and as we start to move on, Alan, the Romans are mentioned in here somewhere. And that is Alan's ideal woman. Isn't it, Alan?
No.
No? Okay, fair enough. Now,
That'll do for me.
what about your missus? One thing about the hair braiding here is that with our individual, you've got sort of little silver orbs braided into the hair. And this is what comes clear. This is an individual that's buried with all the evidence to say that they were male and female. Good. Now I've confused you. Now, when I initially started to get interested in archaeology in the early 1980s, they used to have these television programs on for children, sort of 1983, 1984. And we're going to do Vicky the Viking in a minute, put it by there. Sorry, Julian. Vicky the Viking, remember that one. You could be Vicky the Viking's mouthpiece, Alan.
What about noggin the nog?
Okay, you can put nog in the nog where you want to be. That's in the 70s, not my 80s, okay? Right.
Baby.
Okay, now when I was initially watching these programs, I started to realise that archaeology is about stereotyping. So in other words, females were negative, and their domain was in darkness, and females' domains were on the left. That's what they, this is an archaeology program for children, right? So what women would do, as they would enter a Neolithic building, they would go around the fireplace on the left, and the men would be positive and in the light, and they would go around the fireplace on the right. Okay? So this is something that was installed in me from a very early age, right? Women are very negative things. They only stay around in houses, right? So that's what I learned when I was a child. However, what was that thing I wanted to remember?
Yes.
Exactly, Vicky. At the same time, there was a cartoon series from Sweden, I think it was, and it was dubbed over, it was called Vicky the Viking. It used to go, hey, hey, Vicky, hey, remember that? Vicky the Viking, na 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 na. Anyway, right. It was called Vicky the Viking, right? Now this is what blew my mind, right? At the same time, I had this big thing for Mrs. Spoon. We've been to Button Moon and all the rest of it, right? Mrs. Spoon in Button Moon she was a spoon dressed up as a woman. She's my ideal woman, right? Never found anybody like that until I met Michelle. Anyway, the long story short, Vicky the Viking, right? It was called Vicky the Viking, and it would open with her father saying, "Son," and she looked like a girl with red hair. She sounded like a girl, right? But her dad called her my boy, right? Let's go fighting, my lad. And all the crew members would say, boy and lad, and this is my man. And I'm thinking, what? I don't get this. I've just watched this program, right? And I don't get this children's series, right? Very important that, and the reason why those two things were at loggerheads was because in Viking society, and I've said this time immemorial, the domain of the masculine ego, right, which is the outside, and not the id, which is the inside, which is the biological self, the ego itself, outside, you're wandering around outside, is actually a male prerequisite. Okay, so because an inside a building is a female requisite, right? So if you're doing jobs so for example, right, me teaching here and you lot sitting listening, right, you are all women because you're all doing a female thing, right? You're not outside working in a field. You're not outside raping and pillaging. I think Gillian is, but therefore she's classed as a man, and Jane. You're not outside doing any of these things, right? So all of you are women. Alan, let me have my dress back. Okay, he's not happy this week, is he? Let me have my dress back, right? And Keith,
Yeah.
that frilly number, I want it back. So
Oh,
in other words, this is what's happened, and this is the Viking world. Lots of archaeologists believe this, others don't. And then I had a day school a few years ago. I think Lynn was there on that one. I had a day school a few years ago. I was doing this research, and I thought, I don't believe any of this. Obviously, women are women and men are men, right? And I started doing the research, and I thought, actually, women had so much power in the Viking world, right? They could decide who the hell they liked to be. They could be men, women, they could do whatever they liked, right? And if say, for example, there's a couple, right? Lady and Lord Skrubenherben, right? Lady Skrubenherben's sitting there, right? She's gorgeous, right? And Alan looks over, right? There's eye contact, right? Lady Skrubenherben, right, doesn't like this eye contact, so she tells her husband, Lord Skrubenherben, and she says, right, I want this man killed because he looked at me right into my face, right into my eyes, right? I want him stoned to death, right? Alan, that's your fate. Just at the say-so of Lady Skrubenherben. This is the power that Viking women had. So Viking women, on that sort of nature course of action, could have gone into battle. And we know that they went into battle because we got the evidence of these individuals. Strangely enough, lots of what we do see. I've been to Orkney a number of times. I love it to bits. And the island of Sanday. The island of Sanday, they found a number of Viking ship burials. Actually, they're little boats with one or two people in them. And they do find women with swords. And they definitely belong to their fathers. Do you know what I mean? If that sword was found with a male, it definitely belonged to the male. Can you see the problem I'm up against, right? So it's like that old sort of tomboy thing, isn't it? Right? Michelle keeps telling me she used to play up trees, she used to play with cars and all sorts of things, right? When I was a boy, girls plaited other people's hair and they played with dollies. Except when I was in junior school, I would do crocheting and I would plait the girl's hair. So that makes me female. So the problem is, the dichotomy is jumping in and making these assertions. And the other thing as well is, right, women produce life, men take it away. You've heard that one, haven't you? Yeah, that balance. Females are the ones that nurture life and give life, and men destroy it and take it away, right? I tell you what, when you've got a really pissed off woman, some of the worst concentration camp guards were actually women, right? They were some of the worst. Those were the blood hardiest. Those were the nasty, most vindictive of all the death camp guards, okay? And if you look at it that way, you've got to really start to reassess history in your mind. Keith, can I ask you a question, right?
Me?
Is there any records of any women fighting at Waterloo?
Not at the time, no. A couple of women were identified after they died or admitted that they'd been there. But normally they would have to hide the fact that they were women.
Interesting point. I was expecting you to say damn right no, but that is a really good point. That is a really good point. So can you imagine, this is an interesting point. There's an archaeological excavation at Waterloo and they find women in with the men and they think, oh, those are just prostitutes. They wouldn't have fought in the battle and they would just be identified as people not fighting. Reanalysis of the skeletal remains studies in the 1970s had questioned the assumption the skeleton was male. Even in the 1970s, they were saying, look, it could be female, and the archaeologists were saying, no, it's male. The predomination of males in archaeology is definitely male, definitely male. Even in the 1980s, practically all the archaeologists I knew were male, and now it would be very difficult for me to employ a male because most graduates, a female. In 2014, the archaeologist, a female archaeologist, Anna Skelström from Stockholm University, started looking at the pelvic bones. Now this is over 130 years, well, nearly 130 years after the body had been excavated.
Sciatic notch.
Exactly. Somebody started looking at the pelvic bones, right, and the mandible, right? And the answer was that the pelvic bones are damaged. It's definitely a male. And the mandible, the lower mandible, is definitely the mandible of a man who's got sort of a really sort of narrower lower mandible, right? And it was just thrown out. It was just completely thrown out in 2014. This is what this Anna Skelström was up against. And some archaeologists were sceptical. They just thought, like, this is what is actually the case is that some of the bones got mixed up, and a female mandible got mixed up with the male mandible, and that's why it's identified as a female mandible, because the original male mandible got lost. But it's not really possible because all the stuff from this excavation was kept together. It was all labelled and kept together, and they started to say, well, if anything's identified as being female with this body, it's got mixed up. So she just couldn't win. So she gave up. 2014. But in 2017, one of her PhD students, Charlotte Johnson, 2017, thought, right, we need to answer the question of whether this is male or female. We're looking at the bones, right? Forget about the bloody artifacts, right? Let's just look at the bones. And the male archaeologist is saying, you're not going to find it, right? Osteological analysis triggered questions concerning sex, gender, and identity among Viking warriors. They extracted DNA from a large number of the bones, from the teeth, from arm bones. The person who's known as BJ581, the person that we're talking about today, they were conclusively proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was mitochondrial DNA was prevalent. The X chromosomes were more prevalent than the Y chromosomes ever could be, right? It was definitely a female. They say 100%. I read a note that says 100% it's a woman, right? Archaeologists don't say that, right? They say 99% Richard III, right? This is 100% woman. It's definitely a woman. And then the archaeologists come in and said, well, all the stuff actually belonged to a dad or a brother. And you start to think this is just not working here. And back about 20 years ago, I remember reading an article, and I used to get Current Archaeology every year until I stopped it for certain reasons. But I used to get Current Archaeology every single month, every year. And I also got another magazine called British Archaeology. Right? When I read this British Archaeology magazine, right, I read it, and it had an image of an Iron Age sort of anvil type thing, and a little bit of a hammer and stuff. I know I mentioned this before. And the archaeologist writing the article said this body from the Iron Age, right, is an example of a woman that's been buried with objects belonging to a dad, right? The anvil and the hammer and so on and so on. And I'm reading this, right? And interesting enough, the person who wrote the article, there was an article underneath by a female archaeologist who said, actually, the archaeologist didn't look at the bones, right, and the bone structure of the humerus itself, right, and the ulna and the radius. They were a lot more powerfully built than most people of the day, proving categorically that this person buried here was actually a blacksmith. She was a blacksmith. Because if those things had been found by a male, they would have immediately presumed, they wouldn't have examined the bones, they would have immediately presumed that the person buried with those objects was actually a blacksmith, and they wouldn't have needed to examine the bones. Could you imagine the other way round? It was blacksmith, anvil and the hammer and a few other bits and pieces, right? And it was buried with a man, that's a blacksmith, right? but you know, didn't examine the humerus. It was really slight, right? Couldn't have wielded a hammer, right? But nobody likes to go down that avenue. Nobody liked to go down that avenue. And then lots of people criticised the evidence. They said, look, you know, this just no matter what way you look at it, they weren't Viking warriors who were female. You know, when I was back in the 1980s, about 1985, 86, I used to get listening tapes from the Barry Library, right? And it used to be Magnus Magnusson reading out sagas from the Scandinavian sagas, right? From about 700-800 years ago. We used to read them out, and there were lots of mentions of women in there, right? The Greenlandic poem of Ilta, as follows: Then the high-born lady saw them play the wounding game. She resolved on a hard course and flung off her cloak. She took a naked sword and fought for her kinsmen's lives. She was handy at fighting, wherever she aimed her blows. So even in the sagas, they're actually telling us, but people don't want to believe them. They don't want to believe sagas. They'll believe every single word Bede wrote, every single word Gildas wrote, because they were male, right? Talking about men, all that's real. But when you come into women, none of it's real, right? As most of the men can work out, I'm quite a feminist with this, but I'm actually, I like to see archaeology as it is. I really, really do, right? Myself, in examining a coastal body, with all the artifacts in front of us, we slowly look at these remains and we start to think, right, obviously it's a shipwreck victim, right? It's clearly a shipwreck victim, definitely a shipwreck victim. You start to examine the bones and you start to think there's something not quite right with the shipwreck victim. This person could actually be a slave. Now this is a female, and it's not a normal shipwreck victim. So what we've done, we've taken away the prerequisite that this person's come off a boat. But it's somebody who's a lot more than somebody come off a boat who's been buried. And you start to look at these things. So again, so we see this warrior individual here. And as we start to go on, I'm just going to make sure I'm double checking to make sure I'm not passing too far. And then we've got these. Forget the dice, but we'll actually bring the dice in there and this dice. We've actually got playing pieces, right? Now this is really interesting. The Lewis chess pieces found on the island of Lewis, when the Lewis chess pieces were found, we've got over 100 of them altogether. When the Lewis chess pieces were originally found, you would say, right, a gentleman, a tradesperson would have sold these to lords and lords, not any ladies, right? And you see gaming pieces. Whenever you see gaming pieces, right, Alan will know this statement very well. The gaming pieces belonged to Roman soldiers, male Roman soldiers, undoubtedly. It's always males who played games, right? Always. Women could never have played these games, and then suddenly you find this board game with these pieces buried with this poor soul. So what does that tell you? So analysis of the grave artifacts, the content showed that it contained a game set with a board and pieces, thought to be the evidence of somebody that has a strategic thinking mind, and indicated, as The Guardian wrote, 2017, that she was an officer who could lead troops in battle. So not only was she somebody who was fighting, if this is the right interpretation, if it was a man, I wouldn't need to be saying it's definitely the right interpretation. This is somebody that led troops. Similarly to Joan of Arc. What did we learn from Joan of Arc? What we learned from Joan of Arc was that when Joan of Arc was put on trial in May 1431, when she was put on trial, there was 75 allegations against her, and only 2 of those stuck. One of those allegations, out of the 75, not the 2 that stuck, right? The 2 that stuck were that she actually dressed as a man in male clothing, and the other one was that she spoke to God. Anyway, but the other 73 allegations, one of them contained the allegation she dressed as a soldier. She dressed in armour, right? And one of the witnesses said, right, well, okay, I don't like Joan of Arc, but how else is a woman meant to dress in battle? Because armour is worn by everyone, right? There isn't a male armour, and there's not a female piece of armour. Only male cod pieces came later, okay? You know, the wonderful, you've all seen it, that huge cod piece in front of Henry VIII in the Tower of London. I've seen it, right?
Yes, but the thing is, he had syphilis, and his penis was greatly enlarged.
I didn't expect that. But anyway, the point being, right, armour only becomes masculine when you give it masculine attributes. Before that, armour, there's no sex involved with it. It can be worn by male or female. And the judges accepted this. How else was Joan of Arc meant to dress? And they defined that armour could be worn by all sexes. Again, if we look at these images, a few more. Throughout history, we've got these sort of shield maidens, Valkyries. And one thing has to be said. I know lots of you might like The Lord of the Rings. You might like J.R.R. Tolkien's Silmarillion and so on. But throughout The Lord of the Rings, you actually see references to shield maidens. Right? The reason why you see references to shield maidens is because J.R.R. Tolkien was an Oxbridge Don. He was somebody who knew about all these writings. He knew about Valkyries. He knew about shield maidens. So I decided to put them into his books as actually being factual into a mythical story, if you know what I'm trying to say. And some people have argued actually, okay, and in mythology and legend, there were female warriors called Valkyries, and these female warriors called Valkyries were people who defended Valhalla and decided at the end of a battle, when you're on the field saying, Ragnar, I want to go to Ragnar, I want to go to Valhalla, I want to go there, the Valkyrie would come onto the battlefield and stab you in the chest and you're dead. And then you go with the Valkyrie up through the pearly gates or wherever they have in Valhalla, and you go and sit alongside Ragnar, okay? And all part of this sort of wonderful story of Ragnarok and all those wonderful things, right? So they said actually they did exist, but in a mythical sense. Banging my head against the wall here. So if you think about that, maybe a sketch of a reconstruction of BJ 381. The horse alongside her is rather large compared to the 2 buried within the grave. What's that?
I thought you said 581 first of all, was it?
I did say 581, didn't I?
You said 381.
Oh, sorry, I meant 581. Sorry.
Okay.
What's a 5 amongst friends? It's always 581.
No, it's
I'm
just
glad
like-
you're listening. Just change the 3 to a 5. It's 581. Okay.
I've done it.
Don't worry. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I'm glad you mentioned that. You should come to some of my lectures when I'm really tired in Bridgend. I'm meant to be giving a lecture on the Normans, and I'm referring to the Romans all the time. It's quite funny. The Romans built these castles. Don't you mean the Normans? Yeah. Well, you know what I mean, don't you? That's fine. It's excellent. It's okay. This is. I'm not sure this is what's on display now, but the biggest problem is when you've got a display cabinet full of metal objects like this, it takes away the meaning of the individual buried with these objects. I remember when I went to the British Museum and I saw Pete Marsh in the British Museum. It was rather interesting. but I'm not really sure that he was actually buried with any of the things they actually found him with, so that you missed the context. And actually looking at this thinking, actually, you know, stirrups, okay, large, sort of broadsword type thing, a cavalry dirk, there would actually be three, to sort of, as you know, if anyone's on a horse, they sort of be able to have movement. And you've got these two shield bosses, the spears, and this wonderful buckle as well, this golden buckle. And you just seeing this out of context, I do believe they're actually display it in another way. Any doubts with this axe? It's definitely a battle axe, just like mine, Michelle. It's definitely a battle axe, and you know it's a battle axe because you would not be able to wield this against a tree, because as the blow, the counteraction would eventually force the shaft to become loose, right? So you're going to only use these for very short blows in close combat. So this is definitely a battle axe. And obviously you've got the wonderful stirrups here as well, and loads of other little bits and pieces, but we'll come on to some of those other bits and pieces in a moment. But we've seen that. There is our battle axe. And whenever you look at this body, you actually see a mixture of male and female attributes, which is fine. And understanding the body understands the artefact buried. There's still archaeologists who think that all these artefacts belong to a dad or a brother. Now, and there's another theory, right? She died, and all her husband's military gear was buried with her, and then they waited for her husband to die to be buried alongside her, because these artefacts belong to him. Exactly. I note it all went quiet then. And what I'd like to do now, I'd like to have a short break. And are there any questions?
Could they analyse the stomachs of the horses to see what was in them? Was there anything in them that could have been poisonous?
Oh, you're looking at a time when
They could
these...
have actually put them to death as well. They could cut an artery and just let them
Right,
die.
Yeah, but then again,
Time-wise, they were
then again, to be honest with you, the two animals would be going out of it anyway. They would be going...
you know, cutting an artery is sort of poisoning.
Yeah. The thing is, the main thing is, however you're killing them, you've got to make sure that the animals don't panic. If they panic, they could bolt out of there, or they could damage the burial.
Don't ask questions.
So anyway, if there any other questions before we have a break? Right. Okay then. So we'll sort everything out now, and I do understand that we've all got a treat in the break. So thank you very much. And you on the 1st of March, fees do go up. Right, so here we go. Let's do this last one. And, oh, there we go. What's it got like out there? Not really. Raining, coach on. Right, I would like to remind you there are about 5 or 6 other people wanting to join this class. So if I know in advance, I could have invited more of them along today. But the problem is today, I had about 3 or 4 people, not Lynn, who Lynn called me yesterday saying that they couldn't make it today. So it's really frustrating. So if you can't make it, try and let me know the day before. What's that? Oh, you.
No, me, I'm happy with that.
Well, that's fine. It's okay. I know now. So, okay, back to what we're talking about. So, obviously, again, more evidence that we've got an individual, a cavalry individual. She was a horse rider as well. And what I'd like to do is go more onto. We've obviously got the bit of a paraphrasing there. And those are the original notes from the original excavation. And not showing everything. They didn't show everything in the original excavation notes, which is a bit of a shame, really. And I know you want me to enlarge on that a little bit more, but those are the original excavation notes of the body, again showing a little bit more of the detail of the objects behind the skull. and clutching the chess pieces, and obviously the evidence of the board as well. That is not the sword that she was actually found with, but a sword which is very similar to the one that she was found with. That is hilt and a pommel, and we've got that from another excavated example nearby, because obviously there's thousands of more graves near here. These are the objects actually found associated with her hair. And if you look at the tiny little bit of detail from the original sketch, you can actually see, if we go there, that this object here comes out attached to some hair, and it's threaded through, it's braided through, and this is one of those sort of tassels, one of those sort of hair braids that she had actually worn. Now, this might not be unusual for a man either, so the very important thing there, hair regalia, whatever you're wearing in your hair doesn't sort of specify whether you're male or female. And these little orb-like objects, nice twisted silver. At this point, I always remark that when you look, for example, at Europe, just before the Second World War, interesting point this, most of the places where you've got Jewish silversmiths were the places where Viking settlers settled. The interesting link there is that silversmithing was big within the Viking world, as it is within the Jewish world in the Western Hemisphere of Europe. So you've got that nice little sort of interchange. So where you've got those Jewish communities evolving are those communities that originally evolved within the Viking world. And another interesting point there, and it was one of those strange little facts, York itself was full of silversmiths in the medieval period, just before they were all shepherded into the Clifford Tower and all burnt to death. Okay, so again, the link between the Vikings and Jews, interesting fact there. So if we look a little bit more of a detail there, you've got all these nice little sort of orb-like things, all nice little twisted fine silver. And you've got this piece, obviously tassel bit coming from her hair. And this is going to be all braided. It's going to be braided. It's going to be braided through there, and obviously over it as well. So you get all this sort of intertwined as part of the hair gear. It could be argued that this was added after death, but then again, why should it have been? It's associated with the individual. And as we go, these are around this landscape. These are the types of things they found with other people within the landscape of Birka. And these pieces here is where we're going to go. So if we look a little bit more about my notes, which are in front of me, and thanks to Lynn, everything's gone perfectly well today. The gaming pieces are associated with a military game known as Heft-Talfler. And Heft-Talfler itself is the precursor to chess. However, it's the precursor to chess, but we still got the Lewis chess pieces being found, which are a little bit after this stage. So chess is being developed. And they have found games like this with a board, with male burials, but never with a female before. So female warrior, a battle strategist. Only a few warriors are buried with gaming pieces. Only a few Vikings are buried with gaming pieces at all. They signal strategic thinking. The evidence also points to her as a member of military caste of some kind. The warrior was in fact female, and not just any female, but a Viking warrior woman, a shield maiden, like those within the Game of Thrones, which I know Alan watches on a regular basis. Numerous Viking sagas, such as the saga of Avustrung, tell of shield maidens fighting alongside male warriors. And this was thought to be archaeological fiction rather than archaeological fact. So as we sort of come to the end of this today, I started off with trying to give an overall view, and we'll look at some final interpretations. Scholars have not really agreed about this body at all. Viking scholars have been reluctant to acknowledge the agency of women with weapons. They can't, because it's so instilled within archaeologists, males as much as females, the idea that women had the same status as males on a battlefield is very difficult to take. Because the immediate thing you think of, how many generals at Waterloo were male, were female, right? None that we know of. So males, and you think, but right, how many women have been known to lead armies in history? Very few that we're aware of. So it's very difficult to break that mantra. But the mantra with this body at Birka is this is a very elaborate burial. Very elaborate burial that rejects and not reinforces traditional and contemporary preconceptions of who Viking people were. And I mentioned this at the beginning. One archaeologist says the distribution of the grave goods within the grave, their spatial relationship to the female individual, and the total lack of any typical female attribute grave artifacts tell us that there's a missing body in the grave. Somewhere the male body's disappeared because there's very little associated with a female in the burial. But then you can argue, what are female artifacts in the burial? Do you know what I mean? It's that thing that they don't really want to understand what's going on. So the real questions, the interesting questions are, what does this female warrior mean? What does she mean? What does she truly mean? What is she about? What are these about? What does this tell you truly about Viking society and how it was structured? Was this a one-off? Did she represent a category of woman that has been largely relegated to mythology? So anyway, they found this individual. She was in mythology. Now she's in the real world. It's the big argument. You've got the Anglo-Saxon saga Beowulf, which is based sort of in Denmark way. They used to say that Beowulf is complete fantasy, and archaeologists say actually we found a site where Beowulf may have been based. We could actually think that there was some kind of weird monster. And then you see that the mythology and these legends have some facts there. A presenter that I used to watch a lot on television, he used to say, where there's a myth or a legend, there's a fact waiting to be told. Yes, I agree. What can this tell you? And when I mentioned about women being people who gave birth and men being those that took life away, that's the way we look at it in the modern sense. Okay? The Viking world is very different from ours. And how things really worked in the Viking world is very different from the way that our world works today. But then you can argue you do have females now in a combat role in armies, but 10 years ago in the British Army they didn't. They always carried and sort of come up the rear and sort of did medical stuff. Women didn't do much in the British Army. Now they are combat soldiers, right? So are we starting to come around to trying to understand Viking society to the way modern society is going? So these are all new research questions, and actually we're only starting to understand them now. We must not reflect on the past by what we feel in the present. So we've got her buried here. We've got this sort of wonderful, rich landscape. This sort of area where you've got some kind of a Viking town and defences, and you've got these burial areas. Over 3,000 burials within the landscape, even more. We've seen this. Let's just try and get a little bit more from my notes. So I think trying to understand this past by what we already know. We're looking at a little bit of mythology, and so combination of ancient genomes, isotope analysis, and archaeology can contribute to the rewriting of our understanding of social organisation concerning gender, mobility, and occupation patterns in the past. What we think happened in the past is very different from what actually did happen. What has happened in the past 40 years through archaeological research, partly fueled by feminist research, is that women have been found not only to be important in society, but to be leaders and to be fighters. And it's forced us to rewrite history. But our that acceptance is very difficult. Mythology, the actual mythology of the time, other than the archaeology that we've been looking at, Norse mythology depicts a group of supernatural women, warriors called Valkyries, mentioned in poetic works. The Valhalla, who were guardians of Valhalla and allotted death on the battlefield. They are rarely depicted in combat, but wield spears. Shield maidens are female warriors that take on male characteristics and attitudes, as I explained, like dress and the wielding of weapons. They do this either because there is no male member of the family left, or they are escaping marriage. You know that children's program I mentioned, the Vicky one? Is because the girl was the only offspring. So she now had to take on the male mantle. She was the embodiment of what the male son should be, because she is the only one, and therefore she has to take on the male role. That's a very important thing. And then if she gives birth, and then there's a male that she marries, then he's the male that takes on the lead in the family. That's another way.
Yeah, but surely in a war or an attack, it would be all able-bodied. You know, the mothers with the children would have to stay on bring on the children, but everybody else who's able-bodied would be out there.
Can we just grab this a minute? This is what I always question in history. It's very annoying you interrupt there, but there's a very interesting thing there. When I look at, for example, Constantinople, when Constantinople was taken in 1453, right? We see that thousands of people were imprisoned, right? And they say all these feeble women sort of surrendered and went into slavery and all the rest of it. Did they really? When there was weapons around, surely they would have defended their virtue and surely they would have fought. Why are women always seen in history as sort of feeble little characters who always get raped and sort of murdered? Surely, from what I know about women in my own life, they can be very violent and they will defend themselves if need be. So I think when we look again in the iconography of the period as well, the actual representations on the Osburg ship itself, the one that was excavated at the beginning of the 1900s, they see Viking women holding spears and swords. That is slightly different from some of the mythology. A series of brooches that have been found in Denmark in the archaeology portray female figures armed on horseback. Is this all just made up? A three-dimensional figure, for example, excavated in Denmark very recently, of a female Viking warrior holding a sword and shield. Is that fantasy? The public interpretation is as depicted of a Valkyrie, but nowhere in Norse mythology are Valkyries truly described in the main as wielding swords. But we've got evidence to say within looking at the Osburg ship, looking at those figures and all the rest of it, that they did wield swords. They did go into battle. Here's another little bit of a final story about this. So we'll get to the end. We'll read this thing out in a minute and we'll look at, we've seen that. Very interesting here, we've got a composite item of clothing here. This has actually survived. So we've got a woolen piece of clothing here with some lead braiding here. Not lead, leather braiding here. And this is attached to this item of clothing. So this has actually survived since 1889. And do you know what? I can't really work out what this is because it doesn't actually say where it was found in the burial. This is a problem doing lectures like this. You get so much about the swords and the bodies, nothing about the horses, and you've got to try and go into what you really know. And a bit more about the Viking world there. So what we'll do this last bit of text I've got in front of me. We'll call it a day because that'll be a nice end. By the way, Sonny Jim, right? If any of those are being thrown out, I'm gonna. So you hang on. I'm gonna grab a cup and a Greg's bag. Okay. Anyone else want any more of these on behalf of Chris? Before I do this last bit, I want a round of applause for Chris. Next time I want curry and rice and a full trimmings. Right. Finally, now in the literature, in the history of the Danes, known as Saxo Grammaticus. Great. It portrayed warrior women dressed as men and wielding weapons in the literature now. This saga gives one example amongst many, and it links in with another saga from Greenland called Swedish, and it tells the following story. There's a story of Eur, whose husband leaves her for another woman because she is always wearing men's breeches. He don't like his missus wearing men's breeches, so he leaves to go with another woman. She decides to take her revenge and, dressed like a man, brutally stabs him with a sword. The Lexdur saga has the broadest range of female characters out of all the sagas, and probably had an intended female audience. It presented an alternative to the disenchanted lives that women were living, given their limited role in society, supposedly. Now, the interesting point being made there is that within all the Saxo Grammaticus sagas and the Greenland sagas, this individual saga, Lax Della saga, it's talking about being written maybe by a woman for a female audience, right? That's very interesting. Because most sagas of the day are written by men for men to read, and they don't want to read about women being these butch warriors, do they? But this saga is written by a woman, maybe written by a woman, for women to read. It's a bit like when you look at William Shakespeare. All William Shakespeare work is at the male audience, right? It's to be played by males, for a male audience, for the male world, right? Wouldn't it have been great if William Shakespeare would have been a woman? How differently history would have been told. However, William Shakespeare had to write for a male audience because he wouldn't have got paid. There's one last thing here. There's another saga called the Hervor saga. Hervor saga. From early on, there's an only child, and it happens to be a female. And this only child, she shows more aptitude for weapons than traditional female tasks. She's the only child. She follows what her father's doing. She wields the family sword against her father's wishes and goes on many masculine adventures. How dare she? It isn't until she decides to settle down and have children that the male line of the family is restored, allowing her to put down the mantle of son that Ankadur never had. So in other words, what we're seeing is that Viking women did have a massive role in society, even as great strategists, as the Burka woman, burial 581. And I think when you look at history, you've got to try and look at history in an unbiased way. Just because somebody's found with something doesn't mean that that's what they do. If I was found with a trowel, doesn't mean to say I'm an archaeologist. And it's the same. It's the same with anything. You've got to look at the individual and then build the picture, not look at the artifacts and then build the individual. So, are there any questions? So, only one from you, Jim, today. Go on.
Oh, do you go first?
You go first, Jim. Go on.
Well, you know there were those stirrups with the button.
Yeah, stirrups.
Yeah, was there a saddle?
No. But there would have been. It must have been held on by something. You can't glue them onto the side of the horse. Right. Okay. Wonderful, Ellen. One question, Ellen. Go on.
Primitive chess pieces, what were they made of? Some sort of
Bone.
Yes.
They're made of bone. They're made of bone. Yes. They're made of bone, lead, wood, anything you can get your hands on. Antlers, so on and so on. Any other questions? No? Have you? Age. Now, the interesting thing is, right?
Oh, yes, when did it all happen? You said
The
found in 1889. When?
about the 900s, right? The age of the age of the individual. Do you know what? I have read extensively about this, and not one of the sources tell me her age. And this is the first time I've ever come across that. I can give you the age of Joan of Arc, and give you the age of Richard III. Okay, 32. You know, you can do these, but with this individual, no. I was asked that question on Tuesday, and I just couldn't answer it. Couldn't even answer the question about the height either. Probably about 5'7", 5'8", something like that. But about my height, but. This is the problem. You don't get the full picture sometimes. Next week, we will be doing A figure that Alan's not really wishing to hear about, a figure known as Emperor Caracalla. He's a Roman, and I know you're not interested in that, Alan. So we're looking at Caracalla next week. We'll be trying to dig up some more about Caracalla, where he was in York, a bit more about Caracalla's baths, a bit more about the person, and not somebody who was a nut job, as people would always portray him to be. If there's no more questions, thank you very much, and I will see you, most of you, next week. Thank you. Thank you. You can hang on a minute. Yeah, any stuff to put in the bin? Right.
Just switch off.
Yeah, just switch off.
Do you want a vegetarian one, do you?
Yeah, no, I'll grab them now and put them in the bags. Do you want to put that plate in the bin, or? Yeah. Okay. You're gonna keep that, yeah? Good. That's the other ones. Okay, we'll sort that out in a minute. Lovely. Yeah. Is that staying, or what are you doing? Yeah, keep that open. We'll sort that out. We'll do that in a minute. I'll just see to everyone now, Chris, and we'll sort that out. Thank you very much, folks. And again, thanks to Chris for bringing in these wonderful treats today.
No, thank you.
I'll grab them. Alan's donuts. Sorry, Alan.
We love Ellen's donuts.
We shut up. Mind you, on the 1st of March, fees do go up. Right, so here we go. Let's do this last one. And oh, there we go. What's it like out there? Not raining, raining, goes on. Right, I would like to remind you there are about 5 or 6 other people wanting to join this class. So if I know in advance, I could have invited more of them along today. But the problem is today, I had about 3 or 4 people, not Lynn, who Lynn called me yesterday saying that they couldn't make it today. So it's really frustrating. So if you can't make it, try and let me know the day before. What's that? Oh,
No, me, I'm not doing that.
well, that's fine. It's okay. I know now. So, okay, back to what we're talking about. So obviously, again, more evidence that we've got an individual, a cavalry individual. She was a horse rider as well. And what I'd like to do is go more onto, we've obviously got the bit of a paraphrasing there. And those are the original notes from the original excavation. And not showing everything. They didn't show everything in the original excavation notes, which is a bit of a shame, really. And I know you want me to enlarge on that a little bit more. But those are the original excavation notes of the body, again showing a little bit more of the detail of the objects behind the skull, and clutching the chest pieces, and obviously the evidence of the board as well. That is not the sword that she was actually found with, but a sword which is very similar to the one that she was found with. That is hilt and a pommel, and we've got that from another excavated example nearby, because obviously there's thousands of more graves near here. These are the objects actually found associated with her hair. And if you look at the tiny little bit of detail from the original sketch, you can actually see, if we go there, that this object here comes out attached to some hair, and it's threaded through, it's braided through, and this is one of those sort of tassels, one of those sort of hair braids that she had actually worn. Now, this might not be unusual for a man either, so the very important thing there, hair regalia, whatever you're wearing in your hair doesn't sort of specify whether you're male or female. And these little orb-like objects, nice twisted silver. At this point, I always remark that when you look at, for example, at Europe, just before the Second World War, interesting point this, most of the places where you've got Jewish silversmiths were the places where Viking settlers settled. The interesting link there is that silversmithian was big within the Viking world, as it is within the Jewish world in the Western Hemisphere of Europe. So you've got that nice little sort of interchange. So where you've got those Jewish communities evolving are those communities that originally evolved within the Viking world. And another interesting point there, and it was one of those strange little facts, York itself was full of silversmiths in the medieval period, just before they were all shepherded into the Clifford Tower and all burnt to death. Okay, so again, the link between the Vikings and Jews, interesting fact there. So if we look a little bit more of a detail there, you've got all these nice little sort of orb-like things, all nice little twisted fine silver. And you've got this piece, that obviously tassel bit coming from her hair, and this is going to be all braided. It's going to be braided. It's going to be braided through there, and obviously over it as well. So you get all this sort of intertwined as part of the hair gear. It could be argued that this was added after death, but then again, why should it have been? It's associated with the individual. And as we go. These are around this landscape. These are the types of things they found with other people within the landscape of Birka. And these pieces here is where we're going to go. So if we look a little bit more about my notes, which are in front of me, and thanks to Lynn, everything's gone perfectly well today. The gaming pieces are associated with a military game known as Heft-Talfler. And Heft-Talfler itself is the precursor to chess. However, it's the precursor to chess, but we still got the Lewis chess pieces being found, which are a little bit after this stage. So chess is being developed. And they have found games like this with a board, with male burials, but never with a female before. So female warrior, a battle strategist. Only a few warriors are buried with gaming pieces. Only a few Vikings are buried with gaming pieces at all. They signal strategic thinking. The evidence also points to her as a member of military caste of some kind. The warrior was in fact female, and not just a female, but a Viking warrior woman, a shield maiden, like those within the Game of Thrones, which I know Alan watches on a regular basis. Numerous Viking sagas, such as the saga of Avustrung, tell of shield maidens fighting alongside male warriors. And this was thought to be archaeological fiction rather than archaeological fact. So as we sort of come to the end of this today, I started off with trying to give an overall view, and we'll look at some final interpretations. Scholars have not really agreed about this body at all. Viking scholars have been reluctant to acknowledge the agency of women with weapons. They can't, because it's so instilled within archaeologists, males as much as females, the idea that women had the same status as males on a battlefield is very difficult to take. Because the immediate thing you think of, how many generals at Waterloo were male? Were female, right? None that we know of. So males, and you think, but right, how many women have been known to lead armies in history? Very few that we're aware of. So it's very difficult to break that mantra. But the mantra with this body at Birka is this is a very elaborate burial. Very elaborate burial that rejects and not reinforces traditional and contemporary preconceptions of who Viking people were. And I mentioned this at the beginning. One archaeologist says the distribution of the grave goods within the grave, their spatial relationship to the female individual, and the total lack of any typical female attribute grave artifacts tell us that there's a missing body in the grave. Somewhere the male body's disappeared, because there's very little associated with a female in the burial. But then you can argue, what are female artifacts in the burial? Do you know what I mean? It's that thing that they don't really want to understand what's going on. So the real questions, the interesting questions are, what does this female warrior mean? What does she mean? What does she truly mean? What is she about? What are these about? What does this tell you truly about Viking society and how it was structured? Was this a one-off? Did she represent a category of woman that has been largely relegated to mythology? So remember, they found this individual. She was in mythology. Now she's in the real world. It's the big argument. You've got the Anglo-Saxon saga Beowulf, which is based sort of in Denmark way. They used to say that Beowulf is complete fantasy, and archaeologists say actually we found a site where Beowulf may have been based. We could actually think that there was some kind of weird monster. And then you see that the mythology and these legends have some facts there. A presenter that I used to watch a lot on television, he used to say, where there's a myth or a legend, there's a fact waiting to be told. Yes, I agree. What can this tell you? And when I mentioned about women being people who gave birth and men being those that took life away, that's the way we look at it in the modern sense. Okay? The Viking world is very different from ours. And how things really worked in the Viking world is very different from the way that our world works today. But then you can argue you do have females now in a combat role in armies, but 10 years ago in the British Army they didn't. They always carried and sort of come up the rear and sort of did medical stuff. Women didn't do much in the British Army. Now they are combat soldiers, right? So are we starting to come around to trying to understand Viking society to the way modern society is going? So these are all new research questions, and actually we're only starting to understand them now. We must not reflect on the past by what we feel in the present. So we've got her buried here. We've got this sort of wonderful, rich landscape. This sort of area where you've got some kind of a Viking town and defences, and you've got these burial areas. Over 3,000 burials within the landscape, even more. We've seen this. Let's just try and get a little bit more from my notes. So I think trying to understand this past by what we already know. We're looking at a little bit of mythology, and so combination of ancient genomes, isotope analysis and archaeology can contribute to the rewriting of our understanding of social organisation concerning gender, mobility and occupation patterns in the past. What we think happened in the past is very different from what actually did happen. What has happened in the past 40 years through archaeological research, partly fueled by feminist research, is that women have been found not only to be important in society, but to be leaders and to be fighters, and it's forced us to rewrite history. But our that acceptance is very difficult. Mythology, the actual mythology of the time, other than the archaeology that we've been looking at, Norse mythology depicts a group of supernatural women, warriors called Valkyries, mentioned in poetic works. The Valhalla, who were guardians of Valhalla and allotted death on the battlefield. They are rarely depicted in combat, but wield spears. Shield maidens are female warriors that take on male characteristics and attitudes, as I explained, like dress and the wielding of weapons. They do this either because there is no male member of the family left, or they are escaping marriage. You know that children's program I mentioned, the Vicky one? Is because the girl was the only offspring. So she now had to take on the male mantle. She was the embodiment of what the male son should be, because she is the only one. And therefore she has to take on the male role. That's a very important thing. And then if she gives birth, and then there's a male that she marries, then he's the male that takes on the lead in the family. That's another way.
Yeah, but surely in a war or an attack, it would be all able-bodied. You know, the mothers with the children that would have to stay on for one children, but everybody else who's able-bodied would be out there.
Can we just grab this a minute? This is what I always question in history. It's very annoying you interrupt there, but there's a very interesting thing there. When I look at, for example, Constantinople, when Constantinople was taken in 1453, right? we see that thousands of people were imprisoned, right? And they say all these feeble women sort of surrendered and went into slavery and all the rest of it. Did they really? When there was weapons around, surely they would have defended their virtue and surely they would have fought. Why are women always seen in history as sort of feeble little characters who always get raped and sort of murdered? Surely, from what I know about women in my own life, they can be very violent and they will defend themselves if need be. So I think when we look again in the iconography of the period as well, the actual representations on the Osburg ship itself, the one that was excavated at the beginning of the 1900s, they see Viking women holding spears and swords. That is slightly different from some of the mythology. A series of brooches that have been found in Denmark in the archaeology portray female figures armed on horseback. Is this all just made up? A three-dimensional figure, for example, excavated in Denmark very recently, of a female Viking warrior holding a sword and shield. Is that fantasy? The public interpretation is as depicted of a Valkyrie, but nowhere in Norse mythology are Valkyries truly described in the main as wielding swords. But we've got evidence to say within looking at the Osburg ship, looking at those figures and all the rest of it, that they did wield swords. They did go into battle. Here's another little bit of a final story about this. So we'll get to the end. We'll read this thing out in a minute and we'll look at, we've seen that. Very interesting here, we've got a composite item of clothing here. This has actually survived. So we've got a woolen piece of clothing here with some lead braiding here. Not lead. Leather braiding here, and this is attached to this item of clothing. So this has actually survived since 1889. And do you know what? I can't really work out what this is because it doesn't actually say where it was found in the burial. This is a problem doing lectures like this. You get so much about the swords and the bodies, nothing about the horses, and you've got to try and go into what you really know. And a bit more about the Viking world there. So what we'll do this last bit of text I've got in front of me. We'll call it a day because that'll be a nice end. By the way, Sonny Jim, right? If any of those are being thrown out, I'm gonna. So you hang on. I'm gonna grab a cup and a Greg bag. Okay. Anyone else want any more of these on behalf of Chris? Before I do this last bit, I want a round of applause for Chris. Next time I want curry and rice and a full trimmings. Right. Finally, now in the literature. In the history of the Danes, known as Saxo Grammaticus, great. It portrayed warrior women dressed as men and wielding weapons in the literature now. This saga gives one example amongst many, and it links in with another saga from Greenland called Swedish, and it's tells the following story. There's a story of Eur, whose husband leaves her for another woman because she is always wearing men's breeches. He don't like his missus wearing men's breeches, so he leaves to go with another woman. She decides to take her revenge and, dressed like a man, brutally stabs him with a sword. The Lexdur saga has the broadest range of female characters out of all the sagas and probably had an intended female audience. It presented an alternative to the disenchanted lives that women were living given their limited role in society, supposedly. Now, the interesting point being made there is that within all the Saxo Grammaticus sagas and the Greenland sagas, this individual saga, Laxdela saga, it's talking about being written maybe by a woman for a female audience, right? That's very interesting, because most sagas of the day are written by men for men to read, and they don't want to read about women being these butch warriors, do they? But this saga is written by a woman, maybe written by a woman, for women to read. It's a bit like when you look at William Shakespeare. All William Shakespeare work is at the male audience, right? It's to be played by males, for a male audience, for the male world, right? Wouldn't it have been great if William Shakespeare would have been a woman? How differently history would have been told. However, William Shakespeare had to write for a male audience because he wouldn't have got paid. There's one last thing here. There's another saga called the Herivor saga. Herivor saga. From early on, there's an only child, and it happens to be a female. And this only child, she shows more aptitude for weapons than traditional female tasks. She's the only child. She follows what her father's doing. She wields the family sword against her father's wishes and goes on many masculine adventures. How dare she? It isn't until she decides to settle down and have children that the male line of the family is restored, allowing her to put down the mantle of son that Ankadur never had. So in other words, what we're seeing is that Viking women did have a massive role in society, even as great strategists, as a Burka woman, burial 581. And I think when you look at history, you've got to try and look at history in an unbiased way. Just because somebody's found with something doesn't mean that that's what they do. If I was found with a trowel, doesn't mean to say I'm an archaeologist. And it's the same. It's the same with anything. You've got to look at the individual and then build the picture, not look at the artifacts and then build the individual. So, are there any questions? So, only one from you, Jim, today. Go on.
Oh, can you go first?
You go first, Jim. Go on.
Well, now there were those stirrups found with the body.
Yeah, stirrups.
Yeah, was there a saddle?
No. But there would have been. It must have been held on by something. You can't glue them onto the side of the horse. Right. Okay. Wonderful, Ellen. One question, Ellen. Go on.
Primitive chess pieces, what were they made of? Some sort of
Bone. They're made of bone. They're made of bone. Yes. They're made of bone, lead, wood, anything you can get your hands on. Antlers, so on and so on. Any other questions? No? Have you? Age. Now, the interesting thing is, right?
Oh, yes, when did it all happen? You said
The
it's found in 1889. When
about the 900s, right? The age of the age of the individual. Do you know what? I have read extensively about this, and not one of the sources tell me your age. And this is the first time I've ever come across that. I can give you the age of Joan of Arc, and give you the age of Richard III. Okay, 32. You know, you can do these, but with this individual, no. I was asked that question on Tuesday, and I just couldn't answer it. Couldn't even answer the question about the height either. Probably about 5'7", 5'8", something like that. But about my height, but. This is the problem. You don't get the full picture sometimes. Next week, we will be doing a figure that Alan's not really wishing to hear about. A figure known as Emperor Caracalla. He's a Roman. And I know you're not interested in that, Alan. So we're looking at Caracalla next week. We'll be trying to dig up some more about Caracalla, where he was in York. A bit more about Caracalla's baths. A bit more about the person. And not somebody who was a nut job, as people would always portray him to be. If there's no more questions, thank you very much, and I will see you, most of you, next week. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. You can hang on a minute. Yeah, any stuff to put in the bin? Right.
Just switch off.
Yeah, just switch off.
Do you want a vegetarian one, do you?
Yeah, no, I'll grab them now and put them in the bags. Do you want to put that plate in the bin, or?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
You're gonna keep that, yeah? Good. That's the other ones. Okay, we'll sort that out in a minute. Lovely. Yeah. Is that staying, or what are you doing? Yeah, keep that open. We'll sort that out. We'll do that in a minute. I'll just see to everyone now, Chris, and we'll sort that out. Thank you very much, folks. And again, thanks to Chris for bringing in these wonderful treats today.
No, thank you.
I'll grab them. And Ellen's donuts.
We
Sorry, Ellen.
We love Ellen's donuts.
We shut up.